Thank you for joining me today for this class on growing herbs. My name is Amy Lentz. I am the CSU Extension Agent for Horticulture in Weld County. This video is part of the Grow and Give project. This is a modern victory garden project through CSU Extension. The Grow and Give project is there to help you learn how to grow food, share the harvest, and keep it local. So for today's class on growing herbs, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is an herb? An herb is really any plant or any plant part that's valued for its medicinal, savory, or aromatic qualities. These can be a lot of different types of plants, like trees, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, annuals, vines, and ground covers. Here are some herbs that you can grow in Colorado: parsley, cilantro, basil, chives, mint, rosemary, thyme, sage, and many, many more. When you're growing herbs, it's important to consider the soil first. Most herbs are going to prefer a well-drained soil. Our Colorado soils are also pretty low in organic matter, so you might want to amend that soil prior to planting with a plant-based compost. If you're going to be using an animal-based or a manure-based compost, it's better to apply that in the fall and then plant in the spring, or give it plenty of time to really break down and make sure it's well aged. The pH of our Colorado soils are typically alkaline, which means they're usually above 7, and this is pretty difficult to change. Therefore, you might want to grow some herbs in containers because they're going to prefer a pH of between 6 and 6.5. Mulch is great for helping to keep your soil moist and your soil temperatures pretty even. Also, you can use a straw layer to help protect some of your more tender herbs as they go through the winter months. Light is another consideration for growing herbs. It's probably the most important thing to consider because most of our herbs really prefer full sun. That means you're looking at a minimum of at least 6 hours of full sun per day. Typically, planting your herbs on the west or the south side of a house are ideal. Next, let's talk about water. Most of the herbs that we grow originate from the Mediterranean, so they have a preference for a warm and dry location. Some herbs, though, are going to prefer a little bit more moisture, such as mint, parsley, and cress. For your herbs, drip irrigation is recommended to help keep the plant watered at the base, but keep the leaves dry. This is going to help prevent diseases. Pruning is something else that you will need to do to your herbs to keep them regenerating and growing well. Most herbs are going to need to be pruned in the early spring to encourage some new growth. This is especially true for those herbs that tend to be more woody. When you're pruning, you want to remove all dead and damaged branches and stems. In midsummer, pruning can also be beneficial. You can shorten your plant by 1/3 to 1/2 to encourage some new growth. Keep flower buds to a minimum for those herbs that are of the leafy type, such as basil, cilantro, and parsley. When you're pruning for those leafy types of herbs, go ahead and leave back the side shoots for future growth and prune just above those side shoots. When you're harvesting your herbs, morning is really the best time of day to do that, and really a dry day is ideal. When you're harvesting, you want to make sure that you're removing no more than 1/3 of the perennial plant. For those herbs that are annual, go ahead and cut those back to 4 inches tall. And this is going to allow for growth later in the season. You can also grow herbs in containers. Let's talk briefly about the different container types and their pros and cons. So here we have a plastic container. This is good for holding water. It's lightweight, but it also can restrict some air movement in the root zone. Clay is another type of container you can use. This has good support for the plant and allows for good air movement. They are kind of heavy and they can be hard to move, and because of their wicking nature, they might require more frequent watering. Another type of container you could try are wood containers. These also have better air movement because of the porous nature of the sides of the container. They also might require more frequent watering because of that. Eventually, and this is one of the negatives of wood, is eventually it will break down. You can also try ceramic containers. These are typically glazed on the outside, and so this provides one con of restricting air movement. They can hold water well, but maybe too well. If you're using ceramic containers, just make sure that you're not overwatering your herbs or that they're sitting in water. With all of these containers, you really want to make sure they have really good drainage. When you're growing herbs in containers, we have to think about a different type of soil. Don't use soil from the ground in your containers. This is going to cause poor drainage, poor air movement, and make your containers really heavy and hard to move. If you're growing your herbs in raised beds, those can benefit from some potting mix included and mixed in with the native soil. When you're growing herbs in containers, you want to use what's called a potting mix or soilless media. This is made of typically 3 components: sphagnum peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite, shown in the picture. These potting mixes are typically lighter. They're going to hold water and nutrients pretty well. They're going to be free of weed seeds, insects, and diseases, and make a nice medium for your plants to grow in. You can reuse last year's potting mix as long as there weren't diseases in those plants. Just make sure to use at least half of the container with a current, fresh mix. When you're growing your herbs in containers, you also need to consider light, and this is especially if you're growing those indoors. The light requirements of herbs indoors and in containers are the same as if they're in the ground. You really need a minimum of 6 hours every day. If your containers are inside the house, make sure that you're placing them in a west or a south-facing window. You also want to rotate those containers periodically so that the sun reaches all sides of the plant equally and your plant doesn't end up growing in one direction. When the weather's nice, go ahead and take those plants outside to get them some more sun. They'll really benefit from that. Another thing to consider when you're growing herbs in containers is that you need to add fertilizer. Unlike the soil, which has nutrients in it, the potting mix is usually inert of all fertilizer. So you want to add a controlled release fertilizer, as seen in the upper picture, into the mix at planting. You can incorporate this throughout the container. Then, every week or two, go ahead and supplement with a well-balanced water-soluble fertilizer, as seen in the lower picture. And again, with watering, make sure that you're watering your herbs in your containers properly. Your containers are going to dry out more quickly than your plants in the ground, so you might be watering more frequently. That frequency really depends on a few different factors, such as weather and, again, the type of container that you use. Outdoor containers need more frequent watering than indoor containers, and be careful not to overwater those indoor containers. Thank you for joining me for this short video about growing herbs. You can find more information about growing herbs on the Grow and Give website. If you have more questions on how to grow your own produce, you can contact your local CSU Extension office. You can also find more resources at extension.colostate.edu.